That's pretty amazing that you can do that in 7 minutes. You can tell a story in 7 minutes. To me, the editing is really incredible. You know, you kind of wove that whole tapestry of old black and white photos and video footage. It's well done. Okay, let's see now. This is a new sound system, so this is the first time we're trying it out. It seems to be working okay. Okay. So I'm going to do a few questions, or a couple questions from each of the panelists here. I'm going to start with Mary. And I want to ask her how much relationship she had with Francis, her grandfather, and how did he and your family relate his life's experiences to you? I asked you earlier tonight about that word, Shakataganai.
I don't see it right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of a Japanese term for move forward. You know, the past is the past. I've had some people say man up. You know, it's like we gotta keep a focus on the future. So anyway, tell us a little bit about your relation with Francis and your experiences after as you grew up with the family, and how did they relate all of this incarceration to you?
Okay, let me explain first one of the impacts of the concentration camp experience for a lot of Japanese Americans is that it discouraged them from maintaining the Japanese language in the family. And so that was lost. My parents, a lot of the second generation, they were like teenagers when they were in camp, a lot of them just wanted to really prove how American they were. And so they just shed a lot of Japanese culture, they shed the language, so that when I was growing up, my parents would use Japanese as their secret language when they didn't want us to know what they were talking about. So my sister and I never really learned Japanese. And I think it actually created a mental block in my head from learning it, because I'm 73 now, I still haven't learned it, and I can't pronounce the words very well. And it's really an unfortunate thing. I'm sorry about that. But, so, the communication with my grandfather was just very, very minimal. And the thing I remember from him is like, he used to grab my cheeks and he used to go like this. And that was his way of expressing, a certain amount of, affection. So there was really not a lot of communication with him. And the things that we heard about him and camp life was mainly through my parents. And for my mother, she was a teenager when she went to camp, and told us, what a great time she had. She had a lot of fun. She was going to dances. She had a lot of boyfriends. My father couldn't stand it, and so he volunteered to work on sugar beet farms. And so I didn't really get to hear much from the family about what he did at Manzanar, which is unfortunate because he managed to donate, they say 1,000 cherry trees to Manzanar, and they built a cherry park there. And he did that in order to, the family was supposed to go to Heart Mountain, which is in Wyoming. And it would have been too difficult for him to try and oversee the operation of the nursery from Heart Mountain, and so that's why he negotiated. And it just shows that, people with money were able to actually negotiate, being in a different camp, which is, and so I learned this basically from Chuck Currier, got us together. And when we all got together and met with him, and my aunt, who's the last surviving child of my grandfather, my sister, his wife, my aunt mentioned that, this is how they ended up at Manzanar instead of Heart Mountain.
How do you feel about people like Maddox and yourself creating awareness of incarcerations? And what more should be done to continue this awareness and prevent this from happening again in the future?
Well, unfortunately, things are still happening. But I really commend Maddox for a high school student who's like sauntering by campus and passing this monument that Chuck Currier helped bring to the campus. It's really exciting, that he did this film and that, now it's been put out to audiences around the country, which is amazing. So that more people can hear this kind of story. There's thousands of these stories, 120,000 stories.
And your sister's kind of I don't know if the poet activist is the right word, but she's been involved with poetry for a long time, and you've been with the newspaper for 30 years. So have you been keeping this awareness going through your writings and her poetry?
Yes, but I only started working for the newspaper the last 5 to 7 years. But I worked at UCLA Asian American Studies Center, which was actually created by student activists back in the 60s, early 70s. And so activism has kind of been a thread throughout my life. That's how I met my husband, and it's kind of in our DNA now.
All right. I'm gonna move on to Chuck, and Chuck would like to stand for his talk. He's back in teacher mode.
Actually, my wife directed me when she came up here. She said, "You need to stand up because the people in the back can't see you talk." I only taught for 25 years, but my wife taught for 50. So I have to pay attention.
So my first question for Chuck is, what inspired your research for this project, and what sources did you find and use in your research?
Okay. So it really all started about almost 20 years ago. There was an issue going on with the Manhattan Beach Unified School District. We had unified the school districts in 1993, and we got people to vote for unification by guaranteeing certain Redondo neighborhoods and so forth, that they would always be able, since Maricosta was always a school that they attended under the 3-city high school district scheme, that they'd always be able to come to Maricosta. And suddenly, as enrollment was rising in the 1990s and the 2000s, they began to talk about, hey, I don't think we can have enough space for the North Redondo kids anymore. It was sort of like, wait a minute, this is the history of this area. And I told the board, I said, at that time I was one of the heads of the teachers union, I said, you can't do this. You entice them to vote for unification by telling them that they would always be able to attend the school closest to them. Growing up in the area and Maricosta essentially being a large part of my life, I was pretty upset. So I went to the Little Red Schoolhouse and been digging through old newspapers until I figured out that all three of the beach cities, people's property taxes paid to build that high school, which didn't make a lot of difference to the school board members because they didn't grow up in the area. They just thought, what is he talking about? So anyway, that got me going on it, but it was probably about 10 more years after that when I really sat down and said, I'm gonna, go right, I found it interesting. I'm gonna go right in there and find out, how did we buy the property? Who was the family? The whole deal. And I was very innocent. It was like, I'm gonna find out the real story of all I really knew to that point. I'd read somewhere where it said a family of flower growers sold the property to the school district and that they were interned at Tule Lake. Well, it wasn't Tule Lake, it was Manzanar. It wasn't just a family of flower growers, there was the Uematsus. And so then, while I'm talking to a researcher at the Japanese National Museum in downtown LA, he says to me, I'm on the phone with him for an hour. He's incredibly helpful, gave me tons of information. And he says to me, you ever thought maybe you could find one of the family members? I said, are you kidding me? That was World War II. And he said, you might be surprised. That was it. Well, I don't know, I'll think about it. I put the phone down. 10 minutes later, I'm on the internet. I'm finding them one by one. Oh, he died. Oh, he didn't die too long ago. Oh, there's another one died. And then all of a sudden I thought, well, there's one family member that I can't account for. And it was the daughter. And the daughter was really high school age. She graduated from Manzanar High School. That's how high school age she was at that time. And I thought, well, wow, she's probably married. Now I'm going to public records. Now there's a married name. Let me see if I can do this. So I just went ahead and put her name into the actually I just Googled it. Bam, she popped up. She was living in Claremont. I sent her an email. Or a letter. Actually sent her a letter. Can you imagine that, sending a letter? I remember the things that we did, before we were spraying our mail and, quarantining our groceries in the garage. So anyway, I sent the letter. Then I thought, maybe the address wasn't good. Who knows? Stuff on the internet. So all of a sudden, I turn on my computer at Maricosta. Here's an email. And the subject line says, you found me. I opened the email, I sent her an email, and I'll tell you what, from that moment on, I was totally hooked. There was no turning back. It was like I had been thrown into this vortex of history, and I'm talking with somebody who was in the camps. And eventually I've talked to many people who were in the camps, but that was like the first time, and I thought, this is a lot better than chapter number 6 in the U.S. history book that I learned at Maricosta. So that is how I got into it, and from that point on, it was really a mixture of wanting to research and write the history of Maricosta, which is this, okay? We did it. It was sort of like two incredibly compelling things, the history of the school itself, and the Uematsu family could easily fill another book. So that is how I got involved, And as I like to say sometimes, I am all but adopted by the Uematsu. They're a great group.
I wanted you also to talk about what inspired the plaque and the process to get the plaque installed.
Okay. I had, with all of the stuff that we had learned about the family and just all of the things that there were to learn from the whole episode, which, to this day, I learned more week by week. Things, somebody calls me, somebody sends me an email, I learned stuff I did not know before. And so I always thought, we should have a plaque. We should have a cherry tree or camellias, and we should have a real nice plaque. But it was important to me that the plaque tell a large part of the story. So, this was not going to be some, I didn't want to go to the school board and they said, oh yeah, anything you want, Chuck, as long as it doesn't cost more than $50. I've been in front of the school board long enough that I, kind of know when to say, hit the road, stop bugging us. I planned it out. Matter of fact, I came down here and looked at the Dewey Weber monument out at the corner. So I thought, I kind of like the size of this. I like, has a lot of words on it. And so designed it with that in mind, worded the plaque, then got help from, eventually worked together with the assistant superintendent of Manhattan Beach, Donalyn Murakauer Leopard, who her grandfather was in the camps. And initially, some of the words on the plaque telling the story, some of the administrators thought my words were a little bit on the strong side. Words like under duress and, So when I got together with the assistant superintendent, she looked at what I'd written and she goes, well, tell me what they seem to be upset about. It all seems pretty much right on the money to me. So that is sort of the difference between being a little bit worried about, are we going to offend somebody out there somewhere, and somebody whose family members have been in the camps. They understand that the strong language, usually we're kind of beating around the bush. Even the term war relocation, stuff like that, they were incarcerated. They were never charged for a darn thing. Their rights were stolen. They were trampled. It's just, and so anyway, to finish the story about the monument, presented it to the school board one night over Zoom. This was about 2 years ago. And on the Zoom meeting, we had no less than about 8 family members. So there were some of the East Coast family. There were, it was the daughter of Francis Uematsu, granddaughters, 3 or 4 great-grandchildren. it was really cool. If you can imagine, we're all sitting there watching our screen, and here's the board members, and over here are all the Uematsu descent. They're all waving. It was a classic. Something out of Saturday Night Live. So then about, they then voted. They said, we'll pay for the whole thing, and it was, they have to run somewhere in the vicinity of $5,000 to $6,000 to do the concrete work and everything. But it sits right in the middle of our entire campus, right next to our flagpole, in the middle of our quad, and that's how Maddox, saw it. He was walking through the middle of campus, and here was this huge monument, probably in the way of, he was trying to cut through between the benches. So that is how that all came about.
I think kind of segue into your first question is what inspired you to make the film? And I guess, tell us a little bit about the process you went through to do your research, to compile the information. I understand there's probably hours of film behind these 7 minutes. So tell us, what inspired you, how you did your research, how you did your editing.
Oh, should I stand up?
Yes.
So, like what Chuck was saying, I did discover the Koimansi story from the plaque at the high school. I think it was mentioned earlier, but I'm Americosta senior right now. And right now that plaque's actually right outside my English building, so I see it every day. So last year when I saw the plaque and then I heard about, they did like a little unveiling and ceremony for it. And I saw that, I read the plaque obviously, and I knew nothing about it beforehand. And I was a junior at the time, so it kind of got me interested and I started looking more and more into it. And over the summer I took this documentary course at USC. And basically what you need to do in that class is you need to make a documentary. And I thought that this would probably be a great documentary to make. So, I Googled stuff. I read Mary's article actually, and then I reached out to both of them. I reached out to Mary through Facebook. And for a high schooler, having Facebook's kind of...
Sorry about that.
Now we all know.
And I emailed Chuck, and they were incredibly helpful for making the documentary. They sent me pretty much all of the historical photos that were used in the documentary. They sent me articles, and they gave me a lot of, like when I went to interview them, they gave me a lot to work off of. So I ended up having like a couple hours of interview footage I had to comb through and then size down to 7 minutes. And then the biggest issue probably was just getting footage for the doc. I had to go to a bunch of different locations. I tried to go to Descanso Gardens actually, but it did not work out. And then the school, there was kind of an issue with that. So I was not able to get any footage at the school. I had to film from the street. And actually, when I was making the documentary, none of Francis's flowers were in bloom. So I basically had to find some stock footage and just use whatever I could find. And that's pretty much how that ended up working out here.
So, Maddox has a really interesting website full of a lot of different short films, some animations, Lego, slow motion stuff. A lot of different subjects. So, what's kind of leading you into making films, and how do you pick your subjects, and what's your interest for the future?
So I started film, I guess, with stop motion animation. I did it like middle school with like little Lego minifigures. You take like a photo and then you move it a little bit and take another photo, and it's like you get a lot of photos. So I did that, and then when looking at like what classes I should take in high school, saw that there was a film class, so I thought that might be interesting. It's kind of related to animation. So I took that, and then that kind of introduced me to film in general. And then from there, I took 2 summer courses, the USC one this past summer, and then the year before that, an NYU course actually. So that's what really made me realize I wanted to make films. And as Mark was saying, I've made a lot of stuff. Documentaries is a more recent thing actually, but I do really love making documentaries and just being able to tell these kind of stories. So it's definitely something I want to keep on working at. But I also love making narrative films, experimental films, everything. Animation too, I'd love to make another animation. And right now, next year, I'm going to be going to NYU for film, so hopefully I can keep on developing my skills and trying new things out.
Okay, thank you, Maddox. So there's probably a few questions out there.
I have a question from Alex. Was the 7 minutes a requirement for the guideline for the documentary program? Or how did you come about the 7 minutes? Or do you think if you said you have a lot of footage, would you prefer it to be longer? This is a 2-part question.
So for the USC class, the requirement was it had to be under 8 minutes. This is actually not the version I submitted to USC because I worked on it for like a couple months while going to school to improve the documentary. Yeah. So it was supposed to be under 8 minutes, and I mean, the amount of time that goes into editing a film is, especially a documentary, is just really insane. But it could definitely be expanded into something longer.
Who would you like your question for?
Probably Mary.
Okay,
So I have a quick question. Your grandfather, after he, or your family, or grandparents left the internment camp, did he continue in the gardening business, or, and then also, are the camellia trees still, are there some still at Costa?
No. His camellias are now at Descanso Gardens.
Okay.
And it's been spotty how much Descanso Gardens has actually given recognition to him. It's here and there, and then they keep changing how they're doing things. They're supposed to be repurposing the boating house, which is, on the grounds. The library is supposed to have exhibit talking about my grandfather and a couple of other families that he also bought flowers from.
Did he continue his business after he left the camp?
So when he came back from camp, he had about, I think he had a little bit more than 40 acres here in Manhattan Beach. And so 45, he sold a parcel, and then 47, he sold the last 47 acres, which is now Maricosta High School. But he still had property in Sierra Madre and Montebello. And I lived in Montebello next to the nursery when I was up until 5. But that's where Montebello School District, through eminent domain, took over the nursery. And so we just had Sierra Madre, and that's where I grew up.
So there's no camellias on Costa grounds?
There are, but they're not his.
They're not.
No. They're symbolic.
Got it.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a question again for Mark, since you have oh, sorry. Well, I said the camellias again, when you mentioned in the film there were some varieties of flowers that he had created, were they camellias, or were they?
Camellias, right.
So those are the ones you're referring to that Descanso, that he had created them, but they were named by other people.
Manchester Bodie actually got a whole bunch of unnamed varieties that my grandfather had created. And he had imported, in 1930, he imported 113 varieties of camellias from Japan, which is supposed to be like, some of their best camellias. And when people in the American Camellia Society found out that Bodie had renamed some of these, they spent a year researching, and they published an article in the 1950 American Camellia Society Annual. And so they gave credit to my grandfather. They listed the 113 varieties that my grandfather brought over. And they also named some of them that Bodie had renamed after his own family members.
And back there, who's the question for?
Robert Eric. It's actually for the panel. I thought the story has lots of parallels to Bruce's Beach. I was just wondering if any of you had any comments about the parallels, or don't even see them.
So, so how did Uematsu, here's really the question. None of the properties that Uematsu sold, from the 120 acres around Maricosta were through condemnation or eminent domain or anything like that. They were all open market sales, and on some of the properties there were multiple offers. However, and this is one of the things that took me a long time to understand, a professor at Claremont who did a lot of work in the background and all the stuff having to do with Descanso Gardens and Manchester Bodie. It wasn't until she sat down and pointed out to me, she kept saying the sales, Chuck, of the Manhattan Beach property were forced sales. Well, I'm an economist, you know, and I said, no, they were open market sales. You know, there was no force to it. I mean, you know, he may have needed the money. That's a little bit different. That's not a forced sale. She said the whole thing of the internment was contrived, and because of the willingness of public officials and everybody else to lie at meetings and create the hysteria that led them to be able to put the Japanese behind barbed wire, an incredible transfer of wealth occurred in those 4 years. So the fraud was so massive that I kept saying to myself, well, nobody is, you know, he has an attorney that works for him. I mean, you know, in other words, these are fair market, arm's length transactions. They may not be at a time that he wanted to sell, but I did not understand at first what she meant. And when I finally saw the bigger picture, I thought, you know, holy cow. In other words, people were having to sell businesses that they had their life savings, you know, involved in for $500 just to be able to walk away. Some of them tried to leave their home and they'd return to find it burned down or completely vandalized. So Francis Uematsu was actually on the fortunate side because he had so much and he was being represented by one of the most strident supporters of the Japanese community, J. Myron Wright, you know, in LA, who watched over each transaction, and I have the letters that going back and forth between him and the War Relocation Authority. But, so he fared better. Others just simply returned to their homes or never returned to their homes and had nothing, started from absolute scratch. So, so the Uematsu and the Japanese internment issue, in my mind, is kind of on a par with some of the super large-scale takings of property, you know, by the government, which, you know, the government has a long history of that. You know, the Indian land, you know, sort of like, you know, that's so massive that sometimes we don't even think about, you know, how much was taken from the indigenous people in just in the state of California. So, so yeah, no, the Bruce's Beach is small enough for everybody to see exactly how it happened. In other words, within one community, they essentially did something, you know, that is a microcosm of the internment, but nothing having to do with the Maricosta property was you know, an eminent domain or a condemnation or anything like that.
Who would you like to answer?
For Maddox.
Yes, Matt.
You know, I want to ask you, one, I want to compliment the quality of your film, your editing, just the production quality was great. And I also want to ask you, given the recognition you've gotten, the acceptance to different film festivals and the awards you've received, and the attention on your film and subject, what do you feel is your responsibility to keep sharing this story so that people learn this little known history or too little known history?
Thank you, first of all. And oh, this is Robert, by the way. He's actually another filmmaker who made.
Now you've set me up as a plant.
Good job.
And we actually met at the Disorient Asian American Film Festival in Oregon for his documentary was also shown there, which is really great. Which is about
We're gonna show it right after.
it's very similar. It's about the stamps, right? The Go for Broke motto for the 442nd Regiment, and the journey that two Japanese American women had with getting a U.S. postal stamp of 442nd Go for Broke.
Answer my question, please.
Oh yeah, no, and to answer your question, I think you pretty much covered it in how you phrased it. I think we all kind of have a responsibility to be aware of the history of our communities. And I'm going to keep on trying to do more screenings and more festivals. I submit to a lot of film festivals, and I think it's just important to spread as much awareness as possible.
If I can add, Mary, how do you feel about the idea that his film has actually now brought this attention to your family history? And how do you view, one, what he's done, and two, the platform now it gives for you again and your family to now refocus some attention to this history?
Initially, it was kind of alarming to be, put on stage like this, because I'm not used to it. But in terms of the family and the loss that the family suffered, and also just the work that my grandfather did, and actually this attention has really had me go back and study and find out what he did, right? And, which I really didn't know until long past he was gone. And so it's enriched my own understanding of my own family and my grandfather's contributions to this country and to horticulture. And so I'm thrilled, that people like Maddox, a high school student, to be able to, pull off a film like this. I myself was like in film school back in the 70s, and so, things were not as easy back then, but still, it's a lot of work, and so I really appreciate it. And also, film itself is it's a medium that you can really get out there. He sent me his private link, so I've been sending it to relatives, which, it's great. So I'm really happy, and I definitely feel that I still have, as far as the family, there's still unfinished business. We're working with Descanso Gardens to try and get what I feel is proper recognition. I would like to see a monument, just like Maricosta High School, at Descanso Gardens, something that's permanent. And so this film definitely helps in that. And also the monument at Maricosta High. Both of those things are things that can be used to, hey, Descanso Gardens, come on.
Back there. Who's the question for?
Yeah, that was actually what I wanted to bring up. Maybe 15 years ago, I visited Descanso, and I wondered where the camellias had come from. Went into the bookstore, and I found a little footnote referring to a Japanese-American owner of a nursery, but nothing more, and nothing more about that. And I'm wondering, maybe the film is done and it's done, but if you were to maybe take this film and add maybe 1 more minute to make the connection to Descanso, because that's so important to our Southern California history. And that connection maybe could be added
find out, your grandfather was named Francis, and who was he named after?
Well, I found out he was actually baptized as a Catholic in Japan. So, St. Francis, I don't know.
Yeah,
Who's the question for?
it's for the panel. I have a question about a larger, well, it's not larger, but another injustice from my understanding. The California Alien Land Act of 1913 forbade Japanese nationals who could not become U.S. citizens from owning property, owning or entering into long-term leases. And my understanding that J. Marion Wright, who you mentioned, represented Seifuji and didn't get that law overturned by the California Supreme Court until 1953. So I just wondered how that all fit into Francis's ability to run a business. Was he barred from actually owning that property, and how did he manage his nursery businesses in the face of that? This wasn't just a wartime racist act, it was a long term. This went on for 40 years.
So I'm gonna give the answer on that, because we could talk about it all night. Basically, Japan was an ally of the U.S. in World War I. And that time between World War I and World War II, there were more than one alien laws and rules that went into effect. And the interesting thing about the Uematsu family is that some of the family was born in Japan and some were born in America. So those laws affected different members of the family differently. So it's very complex and probably too much to really give a shorter answer than that tonight. Or you want to talk?
I think the shortest answer is that they got around that law. The Issei immigrants, that's the first generation of Japanese who came here, they put the land in the name of their kids who were American born. So that's how they got around it.
Question.
I wanted to make a clarification. The whole how the property went away when families were forced to go to the relocation camps. I can't speak for your family. I don't know how that worked, but most families were given 2 weeks. You had 2 weeks to condense everything that you had into what you could carry with your hands. So there were fishermen on Terminal Island that had boats. There were families that lived in Palos Verdes. There were families, all over that had small farms. You're going to go to camp. You don't know what's going to happen to you. You don't know if you're going to be sent back to Japan. You don't know what's going to happen. So what do? These businessmen knew what was going on, and so they were offering these people a dime on the dollar for their property, for their belongings, and that's the big loss. That's how that worked with the, people losing a substantial amount of wealth.
I want to say one thing. I'm Sunday, but we also had, my father-in-law was Erickson, and he took one of the fishing boats for the Japanese and held it until World War II was ended. He was the captain of it. So a lot of people that had American friends held it for them.
There were lucky people
Yeah,
like
they
that.
were lucky. This is one. In San Pedro, it's called the Liberty Bell.
There were some people that left it when they thought were friends, and when they came back, it wasn't there, or maybe they looted, or whatever.
So I'm gonna. We're in here about an hour now. We're starting to get restless. I wanted to have another person speak briefly tonight. Her name is Diana Scar, and she's with a group called Manhattan Beach United. So this is all about education and awareness, and she's going to tell us a bit about her group.
Hi everybody. Again, my name is Diana Scar. I'm a Manhattan Beach resident and a proud member of MB United, one of the proud sponsors of this event tonight. So for those that don't know, MB United is a nonprofit representing a broad coalition committed to a Manhattan Beach that is a welcoming, inclusive, safe, and supportive city for residents, businesses, employees, and visitors. We advocate for city leadership and policy decisions that promote these goals through grassroots community action and reliable public information. And through events like this, speaker series, and bystander intervention training, we are committed to community dialogue, just like tonight, and advocacy. And what I wanted to share tonight was just a more like a personal context for me. The Ui Montessori was incredible, meaningful to me. I was actually not even aware of Japanese incarceration camps until I was an adult.
Wow.
My parents were new immigrants, and so related to what Mary shared earlier, it was important for them that their kids assimilate. I even believed in the model minority myth until I learned how it was used to actually pit one marginalized group against another. And now that I'm a parent of 2 young kids, it's become apparent to me how important it is to share stories like this, especially with fidelity. And so when I learned about this history, like during the plaque dedication at Maricosta, I made it a priority to take my kids to Manzanar. So we drove 300 miles north of here, and we visited. And I remember my daughter saying to me, because she saw the cute little child car and the tricycle stuff. It's a nice museum exhibit, okay? Very clean, barely dust, right? And she said to me, "Mom, this looks like a summer camp. I bet they had fun here." And that's when I realized how important it is to tell history with fidelity. So I had to remind her, because it wasn't apparent to her. I said, the difference with the summer camp is you get to go home knowing that you have a home to go to, knowing that you have a room to go to with your stuff. I don't like to go home. So I thank the other members in the audience for sharing that wasn't the case for families that had to pack up to go to these incarceration camps. So to me, tonight's story reminds us that you and I might not have been responsible for events and actions that happened over 80 years ago, but we as a community have a responsibility to make sure that what we do in the present and in the future is something better. And so that's why actually many community members like myself formed MB United. It was important for us to share these histories and learn from it and to promote this dialogue with the community. So if you want to learn more about MB United, we have a weekly newsletter where we promote what's going on. We host events like this. Actually, I want to announce that on June 4th, we have an author talk with a Buddhist teacher who's going to be talking about breaking America's cycle of racial trauma. That will be held at the Trinity Lutheran Church. And we have more information like this on our website, mbunited.info. There's also a sign-up sheet, so if you want to add your email address, you can get our weekly newsletter. There's also a clipboard in the back, so I'm just going to pass this so you guys could add your name and email to it. And I just wanted to thank Maddox Chin, Mary, Chuck, and actually the audience here tonight. Thank you for taking time this evening to be here and to be part of this dialogue. This fills my heart, and I hope it fills yours as well.
Okay, so Chuck's going to be available for his book sale. We have refreshments back there. I'd like for you all to consider becoming members of the Historical Society of Hermosa Beach Museum. We're pretty active. We have a lot of events going on. We're actually having to hire an events coordinator full-time because we're so active in here now. And we're also starting education outreach where we want to get more students involved in the museum, helping with projects. So we're active and we'd like you to become members. And thank you for attending.
I have a few words, sorry. I just can't help myself. I have to always have the last word. I just want to thank each and every one of you for coming. It means a great deal to me and my family, and to Mary and to Chuck to have the story be told, and you coming and listening to it and being interested in it, and I hope you spread, you know, this kind of story and these kind of issues, and start a discourse with your friends and family and your communities, and get this out there, because I think this is just the beginning, right? I think we have a lot more work to do, and you know, we need to have the young people, I guess, involved. And it's wonderful that so many of Maddox's younger brother Hudson's friends are here, all students from Mira Costa. Members of the community. Rob, I'm not sure if you're still here, but he came. Rob Strokey was here, and our neighbor Ann. I don't know if she's still here, but she's not here. The last thing I want to say is that the three of them are available for autographs. If you would like, I have postcards of this event and Sharpies, and they will be happy to sign them. I'm going to get one. Thank you, everyone.
Nice to meet you. Great remarks. Good job. Gotta get over it. I'm also well connected with this so yes, as part of that movie I did, I would love to watch that. Like I think maybe we do the screening and then talk. I mean, like we love events like this where it's just like the people that can do it all.
I heard the comment about the 442nd. Is that your documentary?